Smith.
Thank you, Gloria, very much. Well, as to the golf, whenever I golf with anybody, and before the game starts, I immediately place them under the seal of confession. And I'm going to apply that to myself right now, Gloria, if you don't mind. Delighted to be with you, and thank you so much for this invitation to speak this morning. For the past year and a few months, a phrase has been in wide circulation and use in ecclesial circles around the globe. And the phrase is the Francis effect. It can be applied in a variety of circumstances, but in general, it refers to the extraordinary impact that the current successor of St. Peter, Pope Francis, is having on both church and world, and in a very, very short time. In the few brief moments that I have with you, I'd like to sketch out what this Francis effect means for us here, and specifically what it means for Catholic social services. From the beginning of his pontificate, people in vast numbers have demonstrated a strong attraction to Pope Francis. And in my conversations, I find that this applies to both Catholic and non-Catholic, believer and non-believer alike. And why the attraction? Well, in my own view, is that the reason lies not only in the Pope's message, but also in the manner by which he is communicating it. And both of those dimensions, message and method, have immediate application to the work of Catholic social services. The Holy Father speaks most often about mercy and the need for all members of the Church to be missionary in the sense of reaching out to anyone who is on the periphery of society and reaching out to bring to them the mercy of Christ. And as he does this, he's making visible the very heart of the gospel and therefore also the essence of the Church: mercy, compassion, and a preferential love for the poor. Everyone knows instinctively our need for mercy. That's a universal human need, but sadly, one that is not readily accessible in a world marked by self-concern and aggressive competition. When Francis speaks of mercy, every human heart is touched and drawn to the messenger. And what the Pope says is reinforced by the way that he communicates. And let me illustrate that with two stories that I have found particularly instructive. The first, the day after his election as our Holy Father, the Pope returned to the guest house where he had been staying prior to entrance into the conclave for the election of the new Pope. Now, this is a place where he had stayed for many, many, many years as Cardinal Bergoglio, and the people, the staff, knew him well. So the day after he returned there, and what the media reported was that the Pope returned to pay his bill. Remarkable enough in itself, and he did, but it wasn't the real reason. He went back to gather the staff, to gather them together and to thank them. Now, I happened to be staying at the guest house at the same time, and so that gave me the opportunity to meet with some of the staff in the days that followed, and I said, now listen, that was the Pope's first visit. And they said, yes, and it was to us. Now keep in mind that the people that he gathered to thank were those who exercised trades that often are not even noticed, let alone thanked. Maintenance, kitchen staff, cleaning, and so on. But as they realized that they were the recipients of the first papal visit, their chests stuck out, and they were proud, and they had had for them affirmed their inalienable human dignity. That was his first visit within Rome. His first visit outside of Rome, this is the second story, was equally instructive. You may recall that around that time, shortly after his election, there was a horrible tragedy, a ferry boat sinking between the continent of Africa and Italy, just outside the Mediterranean island of Lampedusa, The ferry had 500 people on it. It capsized. More than 300 perished. As soon as the Pope heard this, he said, I'm going to Lampedusa, and I'm going next week. Now, it takes months to plan a papal visit, but the Holy Father brooked no dissent. Next week. And that's what happened, and he went. He went to be personally present with the people who were suffering so deeply. But as he was there, personally present, he spoke words which shook me, and I think shook many, when he lambasted the world for what he called a globalization of indifference. This is a problem over there. This is a problem to be handled by somebody else. And the Pope was very clear. That's unacceptable. Human solidarity is a universal phenomenon, and we are all responsible for one another, and this globalization of indifference must come to an end. The message that the Holy Father communicates through those gestures, through that wonderful combination of word and gesture, his message is clear and it's very challenging. The Pope is summoning every member of the Church, and I believe he's also inviting all people everywhere to move away from navel-gazing and toward a clear decision to notice those around us. And when we notice anyone who is hurting, to make a deliberate decision not to be indifferent, but to draw near in personal presence. In effect, the Pope is giving a contemporary expression to the commandment given by Christ to his church from the beginning. Love God and love neighbor. We love God through a life of holiness, and we make that love visible and concrete through the love that we show our neighbor. And that love of neighbor, the Holy Father is telling us, must be characterized by noticing those who otherwise would be unnoticed, and by personal presence, both to and with them. Each individual member of the Church has to live this out in their own personal lives. Yet the Church also, over the centuries, has organized its charitable outreach through the establishment of institutions: hospitals, schools, orphanages, emergency relief, social service. And this is where Catholic Social Services is situated. It is the love of Christ and his Church in organized form. And as such, it is a concrete manifestation of divine mercy and compassion, and must be marked by a notice and by a presence that seeks not only to respond to immediate physical need, but also to affirm the inalienable dignity of each and every human person and confirm them as a necessary member of society. The need for our particular ministry, the Ministry of Catholic Social Services in this province, is broad and it's urgent. Over the last year, this has been brought home to me in a particularly poignant way through my encounter with some school students. Whenever I visit one of our Catholic schools, I usually like to take time to gather some of the students around me just to talk about how things are going in their lives. And at one point, I was with about 15 or 16 students in grade 8. And I said, how are things? How are things going with you? How are things going with your friends? Spontaneously, they began to speak to me about depression and about the worry that they have for their friends because of the depression that they're experiencing. Grade 8, depression. I said, what's that all about? Well, they talked about the bullying and the nastiness on Facebook and the texting and all these things, difficulties at home and so on. And then in another occasion, I was with some high school students, and I learned from them, as I also learned from some teachers and guidance counselors, about a horrible phenomenon called cutting, where we have a not insignificant number of our young people cutting themselves in order to transfer the psychic, emotional pain to the physical level, in order to release and relieve the anguish that they're suffering. We live in a land of wealth and of great resources. However, beneath the surface of our plenty, in the hearts and minds of many people, is a field of emptiness and of longing. And that field is vast, extending even to our youth. From this arises the urgent need to respond not only to the immediate visible symptoms of physical need, but also to the deeper wounds that are leaving many people scarred and hurt. We are witnessing now in Alberta an enormous mobilization of resources aimed at the building up and expansion of our economy. The fact that many are left behind, the fact that many are hurting, regardless of economic circumstance, demands that there be an even greater mobilization of compassion and a collective determination that the globalization of indifference not be localized here. The wounds in our city and in our province are many. There are the obvious ones of grief, poverty, homelessness, and domestic strife, even family violence. And there are the less visible wounds of despair, loneliness, and that deep, often masked anguish born of the eclipse of God from private or public consideration. Here is where the Francis effect serves to highlight the essence of Catholic social services. We seek to bring help and healing to the many hurting and poor who come to us. And like so many other organizations in this province dedicated to the service of others, we do whatever we can to respond to immediate needs. And for this, of course, we're very grateful to funders and donors who make that service possible. At the same time, this organization bears the name Catholic. From this name, we derive our mission. And we recognize that our call is to go beneath the surface of things to serve a healing that is truly transformative. The Christian tradition holds that this deeper healing flows from an encounter with the love of God revealed in Jesus Christ. An encounter that by God's design happens when we touch the church, the body of Christ. For many, Catholic social services is that point of contact. Our call then, a call that informs and shapes all that we do, is to be the gentle face, the tender touch, and the loving embrace of the church offered to all who are hurting and in need. As we know, the bishop is the one who is charged with the responsibility of oversight of all things Catholic in a given territory in order to hold them in unity, to give direction, and to work with them as together we seek to fulfill our mission as the body of Christ, sent to heal the wounds of our day. And I must say, and I'm very, very happy to say it publicly and whenever I can, that as Archbishop of Edmonton, I'm particularly proud of the presence and the ministry of Catholic social services. And I want to take this opportunity to pledge once again my continued involvement and support. The Francis effect has lifted up in a remarkably clear way the necessity not only of the work of Catholic social services, but also of the reminder that it gives to everyone in our society that authentic human growth is measured not by the extent of investment in resource extraction or the number of cranes visible on our skyline, but by the degree to which we notice the unnoticed and our commitment to be personally present with them in acts of love, mercy, and compassion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grace, as always, well said. I can attest to his seal of the confessional as I tried to give my confession. I got it back, of course, that my message was blocked and labeled as spam, which is actually one of the nicer things that I've been called before. The odd thing was I was actually in a confessional with Archbishop Smith on the other side. But he does talk about the Francis effect, and we were able to see that in some of the video tributes to Archbishop McNeil this past Friday at his 90th birthday celebration, which was also a fundraiser for the Edmonton Catholic School Foundation, when there was one child on the video who just said, I think, what can be the new bumper sticker for you. It was just, Jesus is cool. And I think that's just the trickle-down effect of the McNeil effect, the Annata effect, right down through Pope Francis. The next group of people that we have here to be introduced are incredibly humbling, and they make me realize that there is much that I can do and that we can all still do to help those in need in our own community. And of course, these sorts of introductions also requires class, and so another stunt MC is going to come forward, and I invite the chair of the 2014 Board of Catholic Social Services to come forward. Please welcome Mr. Terry Harris.